That fight was so many years ago. I'm a completely different person now, literally.
Originally planned as a sequel to the 2003 Hulk, which, if you ever wanted to know how to make a superhero movie, especially a Hulk movie, boring enough to put a teenage boy to sleep, then you should go watch the original 2003 Hulk, or Eternals. Though little connects the 2003 to the Incredible Hulk in 2008, there are still minor nods here and there.
He is also implicated in the deaths of 2 scientists, a military officer, an Idaho State trooper, and possibly 2 Canadian hunters.
But with the theoretical MCU on the horizon, along with a plethora of rewrites, The Incredible Hulk 2008 was born into this world, recasting nearly every character previously established, with William Hurt taking over the role of General Thaddeus Ross from Sam Elliott, which is wild. Liv Tyler took over Betty Ross, handed down from Jennifer Connelly, who would go on to play Karen, Spider-Man's voice assistant in the Iron Spider suit.
You're in the most secure facility on the eastern seaboard, the damage-controlled deep storage vault.
No, seriously?
And the titular role of the film moved from Eric Bana to Ed Norton, which, to be honest, was not terrible casting, but I'd love to hear your thoughts beyond Bana, Norton, and the future recast of Mark Ruffalo into the mix. Who do you think should have taken the role of Bruce Banner? Leave your thoughts in the comments and tell me why you think it should have been Steve Buscemi. I also heard that Mark Ruffalo was in the running for this, but the studio really wanted Ed Norton, so take that for what you will. The Incredible Hulk is framed as a fugitive movie, which is very much a product of its time, and really kind of an outlier in the MCU. And it revolves around Bruce's quest to come to grips with the demons inside. But we're going to get into all that in the deeper meaning. Hi everybody, my name's Chris, and welcome to the MCU Field Guide, where I'm reviewing every film in the series. So today, we're talking about Incredible Hulk 2008. Let's start with the recap. Starting us off with 2.5 minutes of opening credits, which we don't really see much in recent movies, and I like that trend. We see glimpses of footage which establishes the origin story of the Hulk, but places all of our new characters into their various roles. I should also say now, pay attention to all the color choices that they use throughout this film. Lots of interesting work that they do with set design and color grading and lighting choices. We are shown that both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Stark Industries are aiding in the retrieval of the Hulk, which does confirm that while the specifics of what the Hulk is might be unknown to everyone under a certain clearance level, they all know that Ross has lost something very important to the US government, which does give us a little context to this line.
Tell me, Captain, do you know where Thor and Banner are right now? If I misplaced a couple of 30 megaton nukes, you can bet there'd be consequences.
Spying even on his own daughter, it's clear that Ross's obsession to find the Hulk is beginning to border into an unhealthy quadrant. He's also smoking a lot of cigars, and while I know it's a character trait, it does call into question what government buildings may or may not allow in this universe. My favorite part of this news headline is the one that calls Hulk a green Sasquatch, which is just the perfect touch. The actual article is kind of a peach too. Snapping out of that sequence of disturbing images, we see a nice ticker that's built into Bruce's head of the amount of days since the last Hulk incident. We see now that it's been over 5 months without an incident, which is probably why his trail has gone cold. So Bruce, very much focused on reducing stress and anger triggers, is taking refuge in Brazil's largest slum. And I do have to say, I went down a rabbit hole trying to understand how these water tanks work. Not too different from the thousands of water tanks lining New York City, by the way. Gravity does most of the work. After a delightfully long flyover establishing shot, we get to see Banner's morning routine of feeding the doggo, watching the local news, and handling cast iron skillets like it's not hot. Just saying, those are really hot, so don't hurt yourself, he's a Hulk. Using a translation guidebook in Sesame Street to learn the language, it's clear that Bruce is trying to establish a new life for himself here in the Rio area. While gonna get beat up by Rickson Gracie, who, by the way, is considered to be one of the greatest Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighters in history, we can marvel at some of these beautiful shots for just a moment. I love the use of color in this film, and this is probably like every street in Rio, but man, it's gorgeous. Back to the film, based on how Gracie's credited, this appears to be an Aikido lesson. Bruce is learning some hand-to-hand combat skills, which is probably important because he's basically been a science dork up to the point that he became the Hulk. Because remember, you can only be one thing in movies. You're a science guy, then you're a scrawny little person that can't protect yourself. Anyway, Aikido was probably a really good choice for Bruce, as a central tenet for this martial art is unifying life energy to achieve a harmonious spirit. At least that's what Google told me. Or in other words, you overcome yourself rather than cultivating violence and aggression. It's very important. We're going to get into that later. Look at those yellows, by the way, with just the pokes of green coming through. Working on his breathing techniques to control his emotions, body, and pulse is very important for Bruce, which is important because, as we'll find out later, his heart rate is tied to the transformation into the Hulk. And this movie gets some slack for that decision because, you know, Banner hulks out when he's angry, right? Not just because he went for like a long jog. But I think that they were trying to use the heart rate monitor as a writing device to show some suspense later in the film. But I do also think the pseudoscience works out here. As Stern says later,
the gamma pulse came from the amygdala. I think Dr. Ross's primer lets the cells absorb the energy temporarily and then it abates.
And this is a part of your brain that processes emotions and memories associated with fear. And the amygdala causes the body to actually release hormones like adrenaline into the blood. So it does stand to reason that when Bruce's heart rate is up to a threat level midnight status, his stress hormones would trigger in the same way as if he was experiencing anger, thus triggering that transformation. But none of this actually matters because we never actually see Bruce change just because his heart rate increases. I've always read this as he's just a science guy trying to figure out what may or may not cause an episode in order to control all the factors around him and ensure that he can keep things in order. And remember that'll be important for later too. Moving on, we see a day in the life of Incognito Banner in a Brazilian bottling factory. As his boss discovers that Banner is something of a genius, he pulls Bruce off the line to work on a faulty switch. In the process of fixing this, he gets a cut, and we see a very 2008 drop of blood fall into the treadmill of green sodas. Crisis averted though, as he finds the blood and is able to clean up all the remnants before the production begins again. The plant manager's look over the possibility that human blood might have entered the supply line of his products doesn't really give me a ton of confidence in Brazil's bottling standards. As the camera pans away, it's clear that Bruce actually missed something though, and this is an important factor in the film. Bruce's blood. Ross is obsessed with finding Banner, not to put him to justice or, to get him for what he did to his daughter, but he wants to figure out what makes him tick and how to replicate it, which would involve studying a lot of Bruce's insides, probably while they're no longer inside him. And it turns out the Banner wasn't actually being overly paranoid during this sequence, as who is now credited as the Watcher's informant takes a swig of the gamma-infused Brazilian blood soda and succumbs to some form of gamma sickness. This pops up on Ross's radar and is all he needs to apparently kick off a US military operation in the heart of a sovereign foreign nation's biggest city. Sorry, was he just projecting in Civil War?
How about dangerous? What would you call a group of US-based, enhanced individuals who routinely ignore sovereign borders?
Ross's team is put together, but Captain Xerxes' messenger tells them that they've secured, I guess, a soldier of fortune, known as Emil Blonsky, played by the fantastic Tim Roth. And with that, the team is on its way to go create that international incident, made all the more evident by the storm which is a-brewing in the background. Meanwhile, another establishing moment happens when Banner attempts to protect a coworker from another colleague's unwanted advances. Knowing that this might trigger a confrontation and thus a transformation, he proceeds anyway. But I guess what's the point of training if he can't use it in real life? This is Bruce's save the cat moment in the film. Back at home, we find out that Bruce has been in communication with someone who's trying to help cure him of his Hulkness. This latest attempt seems to have all the marks of success, but when testing it out on his own blood, it is a no-go. Bruce decides that a rundown shack might not be the best place to create a cure for a statistically impossible disease, and sends a vial of blood over to his boy Blue.
You're my boy, Blue!
And at a quick jump in time, Blue tells Banner that he needs more data, but Banner doesn't have access to that data, saying that it's at home, and then he lovingly stares at a newspaper cutout of Liv Tyler. On the flight to Brazil, the sit-rep report is glazed over by Ross, and I 100% truly don't understand. I think the idea here is Ross thought that they could just trank Banner, and that he would never have to explain to his men what the mission was for. But it seems super irresponsible because he knows what Banner is. But as the soldiers make their way to Banner's apartment, the doggo tips Bruce off that something's not right. Breaking into his apartment, the soldiers ruthlessly fill Banner with so much trank that I'd have to believe this much would actually kill somebody. Which I don't think Ross knows that it won't kill them, so I don't know why they shoot him with 14 different tranks here. Doesn't matter though, as Bruce has already made the slip, and the film does a little opposite of the save the cat trope. A foot race through the slums takes place and ultimately leads in the soda factory, presumably because they only had the budget for so many locations. But a dank, dark, industrial building does make for a good setting for any showdown. As Bruce is trying to get away, he bumps into those bullies from earlier, and party number 3 is joined into the fray. Pinning Banner against a soda tub or something, the Brazilian bullies begin to beat Banner bloody, and I didn't mean to alliterate that, but it just happened. Pinned down by both parties, the Hulk makes his first appearance in the film and begins to completely wreck house with the puny bullies and soldiers alike. And I love this shot. It does make me wonder if the Hulk could grow a pretty gnarly beard though, by the way. Blonsky, the only soldier who was not injured, is not happy about being put in this situation without all of the details, and Ross doesn't care. And he says something that always perplexes me.
He's alone. He wants to be alone. Let's see if he's been talking to anybody.
I'm not sure who wrote that line, but it's a weird one. Like, if he's alone and he wants to be alone, and Ross knows that so well he can just make this declarative statement, literally, why is the next thing he says is, we should see who he's talking to. When they get back to the States, Ross takes Blonsky on a tour of what seems to be a Stark weapons depot in whatever military base they work in. But I'm not 100% sure if these are all Stark weapons. He does tell Emil the backstory of the Hulk and that they were attempting to recreate the super soldier program from the 40s.
Yeah, super soldier.
And while they don't say Captain America, it sure does look like Ross has a poster of Cap on the wall outside his office. In their conversation, he lets slip that they do have a working prototype for a super soldier serum, and Blonsky frightfully quickly signs up to be a subject for this experimentation. Bruce wakes up in Guatemala, which does point him in the right direction, almost as though the Hulk knew which direction he should be going. Maybe not, we'll see. Cut to Bruce in Virginia really quickly, and he's began to stalk his old girlfriend in what seems to be the most allergy-inducing field I've ever seen put to film. Like, look at all of this stuff flying in the background. This has to be what inspired The Happening. I know I'm saying hard cut a lot, but lots of these in this film. Hard cut to Stan Lee's Diner, which is both a play on Stan Lee, who created the character of the Hulk along with Jack Kirby, but the man who actually plays the owner of Stan Lee's is Paul Soles, who previously provided the voice of the Hulk in the 1966 animated series The Marvel Superheroes.
Why am I locked in here? I want out! 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 Out!
Stanley gives Bruce a place to stay and tells him that his main squeeze is now dating Phil Dunphy, which is hilarious in modern eyes. But by the way, this character is Doc Samson from the comics, meaning that, he may still show up in the MCU at some point. Moving from the 60s Hulk voice to the 70s Hulk himself, Banner has to sneak by a very huge Lou Ferrigno as the pizza guy.
I like it, but I'm thinking it might be a little bit small.
Totally, and it smells like fart.
Upon bribing Guilfoyle from Silicon Valley, Bruce is able to hack his way into Culver University's mainframe in an attempt to find the data that Mr. Blue is needing. It's at this point that I realize that Martin Starr here, while credited as computer nerd, may actually go on to be a high school teacher a little north of here. Unfortunately, Bruce is unable to locate that missing data, but upon arrival at Stanley's Diner, he bumps into Betty and nopes the F on out of there real quick. And I'm not really sure how, but Betty finds him amidst the torrential downpour, and the two reconnect. She reveals that she kept this data on his blood, or whatever, safe from her dad, General Ross, since the incident. Back at the lab, General Ross, a literal general in the US military, walks himself all the way down to cold storage just to retrieve the super soldier serum himself. There's a nod here to the original Doc who created the Cap juice, which is nice, but I can't get over how much mist is in here. Like, I don't understand the mist. I guess it makes it look cold, which is the sensation that they're going for, but I'm pretty sure if there was this much fluid in the air, it would condensate over everything and or freeze, and it would begin to look like Mr. Freeze's hideout. I'm not sure if this was on purpose, but while Banner nor Betty are getting any, Blonsky is off getting all of his desires pumped into him. Cut to the campus the next day, and there's yet another storm a-brewing, and I think I counted this as the third storm a-brewing in this film so far. Betty takes Bruce's hat off so that he can be spotted more easily. Bruce, on the other hand, spots the army setting up their operation, leading us to see Blonsky's super soldier formula has taken full effect. As Banner runs through an extremely well-organized, color-coded library section of the university, Betty calls time out to get her dad's attention. Yet again, it's clear that Ross hasn't given his men a full threat report of what Banner is capable of. But benefit of the doubt, I'm assuming he's thinking that Banner may just give himself up if he's fully surrounded like this. Betty makes a break for it and gives this dude a solid elbow to the nose. Upon tackling her though, Bruce hulks out, and then we get a couple of what I call Hitchcock zooms. I'm sure there's a different name for it, but that's always what I've called it. Opening fire on US soil, the US military is doing their best to coordinate an attack on the Hulk. I'll never understand henchmen, by the way. These soldiers are seeing a giant Hulk of a dude just taking 50 caliber rounds like it's nothing, and they're standing 4 feet away from him and like, nah, I got this. Blam, 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 blam. Like Blonsky does the same thing, but just with a little bit more parkour.
My God, he's doing it.
But it turns out, surprise, surprise, Blonsky is just baiting Hulk into position so then get the Stark sonic blasters to hopefully incapacitate the Hulk. See, the thing about the Hulk is the angrier he gets, the stronger he gets, and his power levels are relatively unchecked in the MCU, so noise is no real problem. Blonsky takes his best shot in what makes up for an amazingly great sequence in which he squares up to the Hulk, man to man, mano a mano, just to get the same treatment that Xerxes' messenger got. As Betty walks out to talk to Hulk, a gunship that Ross called in begins to rain high caliber rounds down on Hulk. He saves Betty, takes down the copter, and somehow he stops an explosion from killing her. As the storm rages on, Hulk and Betty have this King Kong moment, and we do see the undercurrent of the same Hulk for the rest of the MCU. He's reasonable, childlike in his emotional response, but as Betty reasons at some point in the film, it's possible that Bruce is actually still in there when he's in Hulk form. As the two fugitives are on the lam being very careful, Bruce attempts to contact Mr. Blue now that he has all the data. Now I'm assuming that Bruce thought he was safe, he was doing some sort of encrypted thing, but he wasn't probably counting on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s involvement with the search. As they make their way to meet up with Mr. Blue, now, Ross knowing exactly where they're going, Blonsky wakes up fully healed and ready to dose up again. And he does start showing some side effects. Banner, Betty, and Blue, or Stearns, are discussing what a cure for Hulkism might look like. He said he's not certain if the treatment that he's devised will actually cure Hulkism or just stop that individual episode. Turns out it's the latter, but after the test, Stearns shows Banner a collection of his blood that he's been experimenting with. He says,
"You didn't send me much to work with, so I had to concentrate it and make more."
And I'm not really sure that's how this works, but someone can correct me in the comments. As Bruce is explaining that his blood is too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands, a sniper takes a shot on Bruce, which kicks off Bruce's eventual capture, and Betty goes with him for some reason. Back to the lab with a few screws loose, Blonsky tells Stearns to Hulkify him, and for whatever reason, Stearns is, kind of turned on by the idea.
An abomination.
Thus the abomination is born, and maybe the leader is running around the MCU too? Not sure if that's ever gonna pay off. But Abomination goes full wrecking crew in Harlem with just so many people around. I understand people don't want to leave their cars, but he's wrecking the street for 5 straight minutes and there's still hundreds of people around this entire time. I mean, I know it's New York City at night, but I guess I'd rather get robbed running through an alley than having a taxi cab slammed on my head by what looks like a roided out Darkseeker from I Am Legend. Bruce almost insanely easily convinces Ross to drop him into Harlem and aim Hulk at Abomination like a gun, which I always like that statement. But releasing another uncontrollable rage monster into the heart of a populated metropolis just might not be the best idea, that's all I'm saying.
If I misplaced a couple of 30 megaton nukes, you can bet there'd be consequences.
The fight is coming up, mostly Abomination on top. He's bigger, he's stronger, and his little man inside is presumably a lot more trained. During the fight, for literally no reason at all, Ross commands the gunship to get very close. That gunship, which is containing Ross himself and his daughter, and then tells him to start shooting their big guns at the two fighting monsters, which they've basically concluded have no effect on these giant monsters. Completely predictably, Abomination takes down the chopper, and while attempting to off Betty and her dad, the Abomination is stopped by the Hawk, whose quick thinking and strength saves the day. Upon the behest of Betty, though, he doesn't put Abomination down, probably in order for him to be able to make future appearances in sequels or this crazy MCU thing if it ever takes off. As General Ross lets Hulk get away, he parkours off rooftops into the sunrise.
Parkour!
Cut to a drunk Ross in a military bar, and I'm not really sure what he's down about. Maybe it got handed to him for losing a Hulk, but he's visited by the one and only Tony Stark, who says something about putting a team together, to much of the confusion of all of us who enjoy the MCU in the future. It's a cute moment, but in the broader story of the MCU, it doesn't actually make sense. So much so that Marvel actually created a one-shot to be included with the Thor DVD release, just to correct the timeline here. In this one-shot, Coulson and Hydra double agent Jasper Sitwell discuss how to handle the World Security Council's demand that they include Blonsky's Abomination on the Avengers Initiative. Turns out that Ross covered up Blonsky's super soldier stuff by pinning all the Harlem stuff on Hulk, which does make this line in Avengers make a little bit more sense.
The last time I was in New York, I kind of broke Harlem.
Knowing that the Abomination is an actual bad guy, they opt to send a special consultant of S.H.I.E.L.D. to Ross to ask for that permission because they know that he would reject it. In other words, they send Tony Stark because they know that Ross would never let Abomination go into the hands of Tony Stark. There we go. With that, let's dive into the deeper meaning. The Incredible Hulk, while not exactly the most introspective of films, does ask the viewer the question, what makes someone a monster? It does this through a mix of plot elements and some crafty use of colors that I've already teased several times. And we don't see a lot of lore about the Hulk defined in this. It's a far cry from the Hulk's 60+ years of rich content and backstory from the comics. But what Incredible Hulk is attempting to do is draw from what we already know about the character from pop culture, as well as the loosely connected 2003 film. In other words, most people watching this probably are loosely familiar with the IP, and that would allow the director to forego crafting all of the rules of this universe. As a byproduct, things do get a little weird, but we're going to talk about that later. Framed almost as a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde fugitive story, Banner is on the run throughout this film. On the surface, he's running from General Ross. But the subtext here is that Bruce is running from the demons within. With the theme of monsters on the mind, think about the first time we see the Hulk in this film. It's during the soda bottling plant sequence. While it's always cheaper to film big CG creatures like this when they're obfuscated by the darkness, the rain, or other obstructions, the Hulk in this sequence is quite terrifying to the victims he's stalking, but it's also obvious he's supposed to be terrifying to us. I mean, look at the shot of Ironmonger coming to life in Iron Man versus the shot of Hulk here. It's eerily similar framing with the bodies flying all around. It's clear they're tinkering with this idea that maybe Banner does need to get rid of this uncontrollable hulking monster within him. Let's talk for just a moment about how the film uses colors. While the comic book Hulk was actually intended to be gray, he definitely has been associated with the green rage monster for most of his run with the Marvel franchise. We'd expect Banner then to be surrounded with these reminders of the monster within, with plenty of green all over the place. Now, while he does encounter plenty of greens, he's also quite often framed around most of the color spectrum, suggesting that there's more than what meets the eye to Banner. But if you think about who is almost entirely filmed against green in this movie, well, it's General Ross. He's always either color graded green, standing in front of green screens, walking through a room full of green equipment, green floors, green walls. I believe it's the film's way to say that while the Hulk is a dangerous rage monster, the real danger is this chain-smoking obsessive general. His obsession to find the Hulk is playing with the lives of so many of his ill-equipped men, committing international incidents like he's an Avenger or something, creates a problem bigger than himself, and alienates the only family he has left, leaving him hopeless and desperate by the end of this movie. And obsession is the other motif that we see in The Incredible Hulk. As Banner is obsessed with finding a way to rid himself of the Hulk, Ross is obsessed with gaining the abilities of the Hulk. Well, maybe not his own abilities, like, we know he turns into the Red Hulk at some point, but gaining a Hulk, I guess, as a capability. And Blonsky, who has apparently never lost a game of Uno, and it shows, is obsessed with beating the Hulk, which is why the resolution of the film shows Ross so defeated. Even though we know that no consequences have found their way to him, he's drowning himself in forget juice because his obsession took him down dark roads and then just left him stranded. The Abomination learned what I did every time I played Call of Duty, that no matter how hard I try, there will always be someone better than me. And coincidentally, that's the mental fortitude of a 12-year-old also. Which brings us to Banner and his rage problem. Anger manifests itself in different people in different ways. And psychologically speaking, anger is the result of unmet expectations. Whether we expect drivers to treat us with respect while we're on the road, or that cabinet door I just banged my head into to be shut, an event occurs which is counter to our expectations. It's at this point we move from the psychological to the biological, as I already explained earlier in this video. Humans, through millions of years of evolution, have developed this reaction as a means to respond to threats and thus perpetuate our species. Now we just use it to rage quit video games, modern civilization, am I right? But trauma is a tricky thing, as those events can lead to rewiring neurons in new and sometimes self-destructive ways, creating ranges of responses to emotional triggers by external stimulus. In Bruce's case, the gamma sickness combined with his special genetics combined with childhood trauma somehow creates a biological response to that trauma tantrum and becomes the Hulk. And the Hulk has always served, literally speaking, as a warning about unchecked anger. But the MCU version of the Hulk does take the story a little bit deeper in learning how not just to cope with that, but also even use the trauma, which does bring us right back to colors in this film. While many scenes show Bruce nestled neatly on the color spectrum between green and red, one scene in particular can get all of the praise from me for what the coloring does to reinforce the deeper meaning of this sequence and really the film itself, and it's that Aikido training segment that I couldn't stop gushing over earlier. As he's learning self-defense and how to control his organs, Gracie says something especially interesting.
Aqui, emoção. Fear, no good. So emotion, controle.
While he's surrounded by serene yellows with a little bit of green poking through, Bruce for the first time hears something during this sequence that he'll learn to implement throughout the film, and that's how to move on. And to do that, he has to face his trauma, that thing he's tried to control all of the variables of so that it could never see the light of day. That's the thing he's going to have to face. And remember that Aikido is all about finding the balance within yourself. And it's not until Banner is done running, faces the Hulk inside of himself, and truly is ready to move on from the trauma and the damage that it caused. Which, I'll be honest, is a lot deeper than I was expecting for The Incredible Hulk 2008. But that's all I have to say about this film. The Hulk is one of my favorite characters in all of the MCU, and I've loved every iteration of him so far, and all the more now that they're teasing a possible Planet Hulk storyline. So if you liked this, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, and join me next time. We're going to be looking at Iron Man 2. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.